security company in the nation. They protect over 2 million people. That's a lot of folks. Well, they just released their brand new home security system, the all-new Simply Safe. Really excited about this. The system's been completely rebuilt and redesigned. They've added new safeguards to protect against power outages, down Wi-Fi, cut landlines, hammers, bats, everything in between. This is a really terrific system. You know, I was a former agent, so I'm really into these things, and this is a really, really good product. The all-new Simply Safe was redesigned to be practically invisible with powerful sensors so small you hardly notice them. You know who will, though? Intruders. Simply Safe spent years building this system. They added so much, but you still get the same fair and honest price. 24/7 protection for only $15 a month. That's $15 a month. That's it. And there's no contract. These guys are great. You know, I talked to them on the phone, Joe. The reason they don't do contracts is they don't need them. People love it so much, they go with Simply Safe and they never go away. So, but you don't need a contract with them. It's smaller, faster, and stronger than anything they've built before, but supply is very limited. Visit simplysafe.com/Bongino now to order. That's simply SIMPLI safe.com/Bongino to protect your home and family today. Simplysafe.com/Bongino. Go check them out. These are really good. It's a really good company, folks. We appreciate you supporting the sponsors there. Okay. Another thing I want to talk about. This is a great piece I will have in the show notes from the Washington Times. Joe, it's back again. You're going to be like, please, Dan, we can't. Why do we have to do this again? We have to because you know how these things work.
Yes.
They continue to creep. Remember this story about Obama being a deficit cutter we used to address all the time?
Yeah.
So much so even some of the listeners were like, all right, we get it. It's happening again, folks, because the Democrats want to paint Obama as some big deficit and debt cutter, and they want to paint the Trump team. I know Joe's shaking his head like, really? Is this thing coming back? It is. Great Washington Times piece that entirely debunks this. Now, at one point in the piece, to be clear, in the Times, which will be in the show notes, it does say that sorry, I get distracted a bit here. It says that the Clinton team ran surpluses, which we know the Clinton surplus is not in fact true. They didn't run surpluses. There was never a surplus in any year based on standard accounting measures. But it's a good piece otherwise, and it says a couple things I want to get out there. Number one, let's debunk the myth that Obama cut the deficit by 60%. Okay, this is done using absolutely tortured statistics, and it's done in a way to deceive you into thinking that Obama and his team were somehow fiscally responsible. Let me explain how they do this, because technically speaking, they're not inaccurate, but they're doing it hoping you're confused by the difference between debt and deficits.
Yeah.
When Obama comes in, and forgive me if you've heard this before, but when Obama comes into office, his first year deficit, and to be fair, this is not entirely attributable to him. The first year fiscal policy obviously has some remnants left over from the prior administration. But let's just stick with the first year to show you how they get the number. His first year deficit, meaning the amount of money the government spends in contrast to the amount of money they take in, is $1.4 trillion. Folks, that was a record by far. It was an astronomical amount of money. I mean, a staggering amount of money. Now, the year prior under Bush, and again, to be fair, Bush does have something to do with that first year because there's some bleed over. So I'm just trying to be fair. But the last year of Bush, the deficit, Joe, is $459 billion.
Right.
So $459 billion, first year of Obama, $1.4 trillion. Now, when Obama leaves office, the deficit is $438 billion in 2015. So I'm not even going to talk about it because 2016 it actually goes up a bit. But I'm straining to even give their team the benefit of the doubt, not because I want to do that, but to show you the absolute rank absurdity of their argument. How silly, in fact, it is. It's an insane argument. Okay, Obama's last year in office, the deficit is almost as high as the highest deficit Bush ever produced at $459 billion. His was $438 when Obama left. So if you're going to think about it that way, yeah, technically the deficits did go down under Obama from $1.4 trillion to $438 billion, excuse me. The point I'm trying to make is that they're using that statistic as a way to manipulate you into thinking that this was somehow some fiscally responsible policy. Folks, Obama's smallest deficit is the smallest deficit of any president in American history is up there with the largest ever. His smallest deficit, his largest, is by far the largest ever at 1.4 trillion. But it requires you to understand, or I think they're trying to manipulate you. They're trying to confuse you by saying that he's a deficit cutter, to insinuate that he's fiscally responsible, when Barack Obama is, in fact, the president responsible for the largest accumulation of debt in American history. There's not even a close second. Obama accumulated between almost $9 and $10 trillion in debt over the course of his presidency. It's a staggering number. Staggering. There's not even a close second, folks. Now, the debt is the accumulated debt over time. If I owe $50,000 on a credit card I've been using for 10 years, that's the debt. But if next year I take in, say, $100,000 in revenue and spend $150,000, my next year deficit, accounting deficit, is $50,000. So they're using this 60% number to insinuate that there was some kind of fiscal responsibility. Now, having said that, folks, I am not absolving in any way Republicans of their role in running up big deficits. The deficits were quite low in some of the years of the Clinton presidency. They almost balanced the budget in one of those years, as a matter of fact. Almost. They never did. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying to you that media outlets' attempts to propagandize you by insisting that he was some kind of a massive deficit cutter, and therefore his budgets and his zeal for enhanced government spending were somehow a form of fiscal responsibility, are utterly outrageous and completely ridiculous. So please don't buy that nonsense, and read the piece in the Washington Times for some comparison so you can see the numbers yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. I actually I hope and pray, you don't go and seek out other sources of information too. But that's how confident I am that this stuff is complete garbage and bunk. Okay. Another thing, thanks to a listener out there, I had spoken about an article, I don't know, 2-3 shows ago by Jonah Goldberg. It turns out it was at Town Hall, not National Review, but it's a really good article. It'll be at the show notes today, and I really encourage you to read it. Remember the article, Joe, we discussed about the war on smoking? And how the federal government and the industries out there and that and basically American interests that wanted to get you to stop smoking were very successful because they understood smokers, and they understood everybody had a smoker in their family, and they understood how to talk to them. And I suggested to you that in the Goldberg piece, one of the good takeaways from it is that the left is going to fail on the gun issue because they make no attempt to understand us ever. They just don't know gun owners. They don't know the language. But, people had a mom, a cousin. Goldberg, someone found the piece. It's a really good piece. I encourage you to read it. It'll be at the show notes. Thank you to the listener who sent it in, but that'll be in there. I didn't mean to spend a lot of time repeating a story I already talked about, but it's a good piece about the psychology of getting people to move in a direction and how to get people to do things, and how I think this gun control debate, and I'm using air quotes because there's not a debate, as you've seen, it's just an effort to silence the rest of us, is going to fail because they're not interested in what we have to say. They're just interested in shutting us down, as you've seen with all this Twitter stuff going on and all this other. I mean, it's wearing me down, folks. It really is. It's just total nonsense what's going on. All right, another important story, because the liberals are celebrating over this, and the redistricting debate is coming about again. The redistricting, there's a Pennsylvania. You may have heard the story in Pennsylvania where the Democrats overturned because they're elected judges, and Democrat elected judges basically overturned the Pennsylvania congressional map to make it more favorable to the Democrats. Now, you may say, well, the legislature in Pennsylvania made it more favorable to Republicans. Okay, you may not like that, but that's what the law dictates, Joe. The legislature draws up the maps, not the courts. Mm-hmm. I think this case may go to the Supreme Court eventually. We'll see. There is a redistricting case, ironically, I was involved in, that's headed to the Supreme Court. But I just wanted to explain to you quickly for your liberal friends who talk about this, that the redistricting problem and the Democrats' argument about not having political representation is a function of their own choices. Now, yes, does gerrymandering exist? Of course it does. Absolutely. Do Republicans, when they're in power, try to get more seats at the state and federal level by carving up lines? Of course. Do Democrats do the same thing? Of course. I mean, it happens all over the place. Yep. Now, I'm just trying to explain to you, though, that the disadvantages of being a Democrat right now have more to do with geographic concentration than anything. Here's what I mean by that, folks. Republicans tend to spread out a little bit. They spread out between urban, suburban, agricultural type communities, they tend to live in geographically different spaces. Democrats, of course, we're not talking categorically, but Democrats don't, Joe. Democrats tend to concentrate in places like big cities. Yeah. So what winds up happening? The concentration of Democrats gets quite intense. So what you'll have is a district in, say, New York City or Washington, D.C., where literally, I get it, Washington, I know it's not a state, just play the game for a minute, where Hillary Clinton gets 98% of the vote or 94% of the vote. So what happens? Joe, this is not complicated math, but 51% is enough to win, correct?
Yeah.
50 plus 1, right? I mean, in races where it's a plurality, you may need even less than that in some primaries. Yeah. You only need 51 out of 100 votes to win. You don't need 98. The problem is Democrats choose to collectively live in cities. So what happens, Joe? You have these races, 90-10, 95 Hillary, 5% Trump, and they have what the Democrats at least are calling wasted votes. They're not wasted. They're just people tend to live. Your vote still counts. It just doesn't add to the win. It just buffers the margin of the win, right? But it still counts. The Democrats are suggesting that these wasted votes are somehow a result of Republican gerrymandering and packing them into districts. But yes, some of the lines have something to do with that. But folks, there's simply no way if you're a Democrat in Manhattan for Republicans, if say the Republicans take over New York, there's just going to be no way to carve up Manhattan in a way to significantly make a difference. You may get one Republican seat out of it, Joe, but you get what I'm saying? There's just not enough Republicans in Manhattan for you to, slice a building in half and say, you guys on the left side. It's just not going to work. The concentration of Democrats and what they call the wasted votes is too intense. Republicans spread out a little more. So whereas Democrats are winning seats 95-5, 90-10, Republicans are winning seats 52-48. 55-45, and they're just barely getting by. But it gives them a number of more seats because the way they're spread out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm not suggesting again that there's not a partisan interest here in carving up districts in a way to benefit either party. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just telling you that the majority of the problem, even if you were to engage in a massive countrywide redistricting, Democrats, it's where you live. I mean, I'm not telling you to move out to increase your political or decrease your political clout. I'm just saying as a result of your decisions, you're having a tougher time representing yourself outside of the big cities. Right. It's just going to, I'm telling you, you hear it on this show first. We tend to focus on issues here I think you may not see that much in the mainstream media, but I'm sure are going to filter their way into the conversation. Be very careful about the talking points. Oh, it's all Republican gerrymandering. Listen, one, Democrats gerrymander. Two, that's the takeaway. They gerrymander too. I've seen it in Maryland. I was a victim of it. Lost a congressional seat by 1 point that was held by a Republican before they gerrymandered it by what do you win by 20 points, Roscoe Bartlett, and then they put a bunch of Montgomery County Democrats in the district, and the district was lost. So I've been a victim of it. But secondly, yes, partisan carving up of districts happens on both sides. But number two, the Democrats are concentrated in ways Republicans aren't, and it's almost impossible for them to spread their influence. You can't move a guy who lives in Manhattan to a district in Staten Island. You can't do it. There's just no way. They're not contiguous. It's impossible to do. That's why they're having the problem. It's important you understand the distinction there. All right. I got a couple more good ones today, so don't go anywhere. Some optimistic stories, finally. Hey, last one today. Today's show also brought to you by our buddies at GoTenna. Have you tried this out yet? This is super cool. If you guys are, and ladies out there, are campers, outdoors types, you just like to be prepared. Here's a good one. You live in a hurricane zone like I do where communication networks go down. This is the coolest product. When I originally saw it, I was blown away. It's called GoTenna. Like antenna with a go. GoTenna, GOTENNA. And I looked it up. I thought, I have got to get me one of these. This product is terrific. GoTenna Mesh. It's a tiny but mighty device. It pairs with any smartphone to enable the first 100% off-grid, mobile, long-range, consumer-ready mesh network. In other words, your Wi-Fi goes down, your cell network goes down. You got a GoTenna, your buddy's got a GoTenna, you're out there in the woods, you guys can communicate, you can text. This is super cool, this product. It sends text and GPS locations immediately and automatically, privately one-to-one, or to groups, or as public shouts, without any cell service routers, towers, or satellites. This thing is awesome. perfect to maintain connectivity and create a backup network when off-grid exploring, traveling internationally. That's a good one. You don't want to pay for the cell service internationally. Get yourself a GoTenna. You and your kids. It's great. Or emergency situations where power and consequently cell service is unreliable.